I was halfway into a clean shirt, my old one still clinging to the back of my neck, when I felt it, that unmistakable pause in the air, the kind that fills a room not with noise but with something unspoken, something neither of us had ever dared to name until now. I didn't have to look up to know he was watching me. Not in the absent way friends sometimes glance at each other out of habit, but in a way that carried weight, like he saw something and wasn't looking away on purpose. And for the first time in all the years I'd known him, all the weekends, all the breakups, all the midnight calls and miles driven to help each other through life, I didn't want him to look away either. Jason and I had been best friends since we were 13, the kind of friendship that didn't need rules, just space to exist. We'd grown up in the same small town, survived the same awkward middle school years, endured the chaos of college parties, and quietly made it to our mid-30s still texting each other memes and venting about bosses and boyfriends like we were still sitting on the back of a school bus with headphones shared between us. He was my constant, not flashy, not overly emotional, just solid, dependable, familiar in a way that was comforting but never boring. And over the years, we never let our closeness drift into anything else. Not once. At least not out loud. This weekend was supposed to be about getting away. He had just finalized the sale of his condo. I was between jobs and needed air, so we rented a cabin up north. Something with wood floors and silence and the kind of cheap beer we hadn't had since college. Just two old friends, unplugging for a few days before going back to whatever came next. But sometimes what comes next doesn't ask for permission. It was the second night. I had just stepped out of the shower, towel low on my hips, digging through my bag for something dry when he walked into the room mid-sentence, then stopped. His voice caught, barely, and for a moment too long, he didn't say anything. I turned my head slightly, not facing him fully, but just enough to see the look in his eyes. It wasn't shock. It wasn't embarrassment. It was hesitation, and something beneath it, curiosity, want, and it made my heart race in a way I didn't expect. I didn't know you were still changing, he said, voice low, steady but different, like he was measuring every word now. It's okay, I replied, not reaching for a shirt yet. You've seen me shirtless 1,000 times. Not like this. I froze. Not because I was afraid, but because I heard what he didn't say. There was a shift in the air between us now. The kind that couldn't be undone by jokes or distraction. The kind that carried too many years of closeness pressed too tightly together without ever being tested. I turned to face him, slowly this time. I didn't cover up, and he didn't look away. He stepped closer, just 1 foot, like his body moved before he gave it permission. We stood like that. 5 feet of floor between us, years of friendship stacked up behind us, and a single look neither of us knew how to explain. Could have laughed it off. I could have turned away, but I didn't, because something in the silence told me he'd been waiting, and maybe so had I. I should have said something. I should have cracked a joke, made light of it, broken the tension the way we always had, with a sarcastic jab or a dramatic eye roll. But I couldn't move, not really. My shirt was still half in my hand, forgotten, and all I could focus on was the way Jason looked at me. Not with heat exactly, and not with confusion either. It was something quieter, something steadier. Like he was finally seeing me not through the lens of history or routine, but for who I actually was. Like he'd stripped something off too, only his was emotional, and it had taken him longer than mine to fall. He stepped forward once more, slow and deliberate, until he stood close enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath, the weight of his presence curling around me like a question I didn't want to answer too quickly. My chest rose, just slightly, and I saw his eyes follow it. Not shameless, not hesitant, just honest. He didn't hide the way he was looking anymore, and for once I didn't want him to. His hand lifted, fingers hovering for a beat before they finally landed on my shoulder. The contact was so simple it should have meant nothing. But the moment his skin touched mine, I felt everything shift. My breath caught. My fingers tightened around the shirt I was still holding. And I swear I felt my pulse push up through my skin like it was rising just for him to feel it. He didn't pull away. Not even when I turned to fully face him. Not even when I dropped the shirt on the floor. He just stood there, palm warm on my shoulder, thumb slowly brushing over the curve of bone like it was something he'd memorized a long time ago and was finally letting himself revisit. I reached up then, my own hand moving without thought, landing lightly against the side of his neck. He flinched, not away, just inward, like he wasn't ready for the electricity of it, like it was more than he expected. "I don't want this to mess things up," he said quietly. "It's already changed," I replied, just as soft. "But maybe that's not a bad thing. Hey, thanks for watching until this point. Please leave a comment if you're enjoying the video. It really helps us grow the channel and reach more people. And hey, thank you very much. Let's get back to story." His eyes searched mine then, and I saw it. The years of unspoken moments, the touches that almost happened but never did. The words he'd held back at parties, in cars, in long hugs goodbye that always lasted 1 second too long. They were all there, right on the surface now. Then he kissed me. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't testing. It was steady and careful, like he wanted to give me a way out but hoped I wouldn't take it. And I didn't. I pressed back, hands sliding further around his neck, fingers curling just beneath the hairline. His other hand moved to my waist, light at first, but then anchoring me to him as if this, right here, had always been the destination. Our lips moved in sync. Not perfectly but naturally, like we were learning a language we both somehow already knew. When we finally broke apart, our foreheads touched. He was breathing harder now, and so was I. "This okay?" he asked, his thumb still resting against my skin. "Yeah," I whispered. "It's more than okay." For a long time we just stood there, forehead to forehead, breath mingling in that small space between us, our hands still resting on skin like we were both afraid that letting go might make everything disappear. Outside, the wind pushed gently against the trees. The branches creaked against the cabin roof. But inside the room, everything had gone completely still. There was no panic, no second-guessing, no sense of rushing to define what had just happened. Only the quiet certainty that this moment had been waiting in the background of our lives for a long, long time. Jason's fingers moved from my waist to the small of my back, dragging softly, as if he was making sure I was really there, really staying in this. His lips brushed mine again. Lighter this time, slower, before he pulled back just enough to look at me properly. "I don't think I've ever wanted to kiss someone this badly," he said, voice hoarse, almost like it hurt to admit. "You just did?" I whispered, my hand sliding up to cup his jaw. "And it was exactly what I wanted too." He smiled, but it wasn't smug or playful. It was small, almost shy, like part of him was still bracing for me to step back. But I didn't. I pressed closer instead, letting my bare chest meet his t-shirt, the difference in texture sparking warmth between us that settled into something deeper. Then I moved in again and kissed him for real, longer, with more weight, more honesty. His hands came up to cradle the sides of my face, and I could feel the tension melt out of him as he leaned in fully, body pressing gently into mine, like he'd finally stopped holding himself back. By the time we pulled away, we weren't two best friends anymore, not exactly. We were something else now, something not yet named, but undeniably real. He took a slow breath and then said, "I want to touch you, but only if you want that too." The fact that he asked, the way he gave me the space to say no, it made me want him more. I nodded, and he stepped back just a little, long enough to gently tug at the waistband of my sweatpants. His fingers were careful, watching my face the entire time, giving me the option to stop him. But I didn't. I helped him instead, sliding the fabric down until I was left in nothing but the soft glow of the bedside lamp and the heat of his gaze. He reached out again, this time letting his hand roam freely, across my chest, down my sides, tracing the shape of my hip, the curve of my thigh. There was no urgency in his touch, only reverence, the kind of quiet exploration that made every nerve feel awake and welcomed. I pulled at his shirt then, and he let me lift it up and over his head without hesitation. His body was as familiar to me as it was new. I had seen him shirtless 100 times, in locker rooms, on beaches, changing for work, but never like this. Never while I could reach out and touch without guilt. Never while I was allowed to want. We moved to the bed without saying anything. The sheets were slightly cool at first, but our skin warmed them fast. He laid beside me, propped on one elbow, hands splayed across my chest like he was claiming this space as his. Our legs tangled naturally, and I could feel his breath against my jaw as he leaned in again, pressing kisses along my neck, my collarbone, down to the center of my chest. We didn't need to go further that night. And yet, when his hand slid lower and I let out the softest sound of permission, he followed it with his mouth. He moved slowly, carefully, always watching for any shift in my body, always touching first with his hands before his lips joined in. It was tender, focused, not performative. It felt like being seen. When I came undone, it wasn't with a gasp, it was with a whispered name, his name, and the feeling that I had just given something to someone who knew exactly how to hold it. After, he came back up beside me and wrapped his arms around my chest. I pressed my face into his shoulder, inhaled the scent of his skin, and finally let the truth of the night sink in. "I think I've been waiting for this longer than I admitted to myself," I said quietly. Jason just nodded and whispered, "Me too." The next morning didn't feel like the aftermath of something reckless or confused. It felt calm, grounded, like a moment that had finally landed exactly where it was supposed to. I woke before Jason, the light coming in through the cabin's curtains in long stripes across the wooden floor, the air still holding the scent of pine, warm skin, and something newly shared between us that couldn't be folded back into what it used to be. His arm was still around me, heavy in that protective way he never used to touch me, at least not outside of the occasional hungover shoulder lean or drunken hug after a breakup. But now, the contact meant something entirely different. It was possessive, not in a controlling way, but in a claiming one, as if in sleep. His body already knew what he hadn't said yet. I didn't move. I didn't want to. I just let myself feel it. Let myself be his, even if it was just for now. When he finally stirred, his breath hitched against my neck, and his fingers tightened slightly where they rested low on my stomach. He exhaled once, then rolled back to look at me, eyes still soft with sleep, but alert in that way only someone who's fully aware of what he's waking up to can be. "Morning," he said, voice low and scratchy. "Hey." He blinked slowly, then smiled. "Still here?" I smiled back. "Not running." We stared at each other for a beat longer, both of us letting silence do the work our mouths weren't ready to tackle just yet. Then slowly, like he needed to test if this new space between us was still as real in daylight, he leaned in and kissed me again. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't testing boundaries anymore. It was affection, pure and simple. A morning kiss. A good morning kiss. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine. "Last night wasn't a mistake, right?" "No," I said, just above a whisper. It was the first honest thing in a long time. We made coffee together like nothing had changed, but everything had. He stood behind me while I poured water into the kettle, his hands settling on my hips, his chest pressing softly into my back. He didn't need to say anything. The quiet warmth of his body told me more than words could have. When I handed him a mug, he took it, but not before brushing his fingers along mine again, like he wasn't ready to stop touching me for even a second. We drank our coffee on the porch, the morning stretching out in front of us, long and lazy, and for once, neither of us were looking at our phones. We didn't need distractions. We just watched the breeze move through the trees and let our shoulders stay pressed together. "I keep thinking this'll feel strange," he said after a while. "But it doesn't. It feels like something we should have gotten to years ago." "I think I wasn't ready then," I said. "Maybe you weren't either. Maybe we had to go through everything first. All the wrong people. All the almosts." He turned to me, his eyes steady. "So that when it finally happened, it felt like this." We didn't leave the cabin that day. We stayed wrapped up in each other, on the couch, in the kitchen, back in bed when the sky turned to afternoon gold. We touched a lot, not out of hunger, but out of confirmation, as if we both needed to keep reminding ourselves that this was real, that this was allowed. His kisses landed on my shoulder when I walked by. My hand brushed over his thigh when we sat too close on the couch and didn't bother to move. And when we ended up in bed again that evening, tangled in sheets and each other, it wasn't about exploring new ground. It was about settling into the one we'd finally reached. That night, curled together with only the low hum of wind outside and our hearts beating under the blankets, Jason whispered something I hadn't expected but had hoped for somewhere deep inside me. "I want more than just this weekend." I rolled to face him, brushed my thumb across his cheek, and replied, "Then let's start with tomorrow." The cabin was still behind us when we turned off the gravel road, the sun dipping low and casting golden streaks across the dashboard. Jason drove, one hand on the wheel and the other resting palm up on the console between us. I slid my fingers into his without a word, and he didn't look over, he just squeezed gently, like we'd been doing that for years. The road stretched long ahead of us, winding out of the quiet woods and back toward the lives we'd left waiting. But this time, something felt different. Not like returning to routine, but like arriving into something new we hadn't yet defined. The silence in the truck wasn't heavy. It was full of everything we now knew about each other but hadn't needed to speak aloud again since that first moment in the cabin when we'd finally let our guards drop and our hands wander. The city came back too quickly. The noise, the traffic, the buildings that felt like they belonged to the old version of us. The one that hadn't yet stood bare-chested in front of the other and said, without words, "Look at me and don't look away." We pulled into Jason's driveway just after dusk, and the porch light flickered on like it always did, a reminder that normalcy was waiting. But as we stepped out of the truck, there was no awkward pause, no pretending. I helped carry his bag inside just like always. He didn't offer the guest room. I didn't ask. Inside, we moved through his apartment like we had 100 times before, except now every movement carried weight. When he set my bag down by the couch, his hand rested at the small of my back for a second longer than it used to. When I grabbed 2 beers from the fridge, he leaned against the counter and watched me with a softness that made my chest pull tight. "Feels weird being back," I said, passing him a bottle. He took it, clinked it lightly against mine. "Yeah, it does. Good weird, though?" I nodded. "Yeah, real weird." We both laughed, but it faded quickly, replaced by that familiar stillness. The one that came when we both wanted something and didn't know how to ask for it again, even though we'd already taken the leap. Later, while the city outside fell asleep and the quiet inside stretched long and safe, we found each other on the couch again. This time, there was no pretending we were just 2 friends watching a movie too late on a Friday. Jason sat close, closer than necessary. His thigh pressed to mine, and I leaned into it. My head found his shoulder. His hand found my knee. He kissed me again, slower than ever, with the kind of care that made me feel like he was still afraid to wake up and realize it was all a dream. And when I kissed him back, parting his lips gently, my hand finding the curve of his neck, his fingers slipping beneath the hem of my shirt, we both breathed deeper, like our bodies had finally remembered what they needed. We didn't rush to the bedroom. We didn't tear clothes off or grab for each other with urgency. We undressed slowly, again, like the act itself was sacred. Like skin revealed wasn't just about want, but about trust. He took his time touching me, his hands brushing along my sides, my stomach, up across my chest. I mirrored his movements, memorizing him in ways I hadn't allowed myself before. When we lay down together, it was quieter than the cabin, but somehow heavier with meaning. His body curved into mine, my legs wrapped around his. We kissed through the quiet, again and again, until kissing wasn't enough, and we let ourselves fall into something deeper. We made love, not with fireworks, but with slow, sure movements, with murmured names and gasps that said, "I'm here and you're safe and this is real." When it was over, he lay half on top of me, our breath slowing together. His hands spread across my chest like he needed to feel every heartbeat, every rise and fall. "I keep waiting for it to feel weird," he whispered, lips near my collarbone. "But it never does." "That's because it isn't," I said, my voice just as quiet. "It's just finally real." It took a few days for us to fully settle into whatever this was. Not because we didn't want it and not because we weren't sure, but because when you've known someone as your best friend for 2 decades, even something as beautiful as falling for them feels a little like stepping onto a new planet with familiar air. We didn't make grand declarations. There was no dramatic "what are we now" conversation. Instead, there were gestures, quiet ones. His toothbrush appeared next to mine in the bathroom holder without a word. I started bringing groceries when I came over. He'd reach for my hand in the middle of a movie without pausing the scene, and I'd kiss his shoulder when I passed behind him, just because I could. It was subtle, gentle, real, and somehow that was louder than any label we could have tried to force. We didn't tell our circle right away, but they knew. You can't unsee the shift when two people stop orbiting each other and finally land. At a backyard get-together 2 weeks later, our friend Sarah caught us leaning too close on the porch swing, our knees touching under the wine-dark shadows of string lights. "So," she said with a knowing smirk, sipping her drink, "you two finally stopped being idiots?" Jason didn't flinch. He just reached for my hand, laced our fingers together in front of her, and said, "Yeah, we're still figuring it out." She raised her glass. "Took you long enough?" And that was that. I remember lying in bed one night not long after, Jason's arm over my waist, his breath steady against my shoulder, the fan spinning quietly overhead. He stirred slightly, shifted closer, and whispered the kind of thing that only lands in the dark, where honesty feels safer. "Do you ever think about how this could have never happened? If I hadn't walked into that room while you were changing? If I'd looked away?" I turned toward him, pressed my forehead to his, and said, "You didn't. And I didn't stop you. That was the beginning." He kissed me again, soft, slow, the kind of kiss that only exists when you already know someone's soul. And I knew deep in my chest that we hadn't ruined the friendship. We just let it become what it had been trying to be all along. We still made each other laugh. Still argued about the best burger in town. Still texted stupid memes during the workday. But now there were kisses in between. Sleepy mornings tangled in sheets. Coffee mugs passed with warm touches. And a silence that didn't need to be filled anymore, because in it we found something neither of us had ever dared to name. Love, yes, but also home.